The night my mother removed me from the family WhatsApp group and sent me a private message saying, "Don't contact us again until you're ready to apologize." I was sitting in a Supermocha parking lot with the grocery bags still in the backseat. And the first thing I did was read the message 3 times to make sure it said what I thought it said. And the second thing I did was open my banking app. And at 1:12 in the morning, I cancelled $8,746 in monthly payments I had been covering punctually for 4 years. And I did it with the same calm with which I would have cancelled any subscription that had stopped making sense. Because in that moment, in that parking lot, with my phone illuminating my face in the darkness, I understood that what my family had just done was not the end of an argument but the end of a contract that only one side had been honoring. If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, quiet justice, and people who discover too late that actions have consequences, subscribe to Unspoken Truth, because we share stories like this every day. My name is Eller. I am 32 years old. I work as a project coordinator at a technology company, and for 4 years I was what my family called, when they spoke about me with pride at social gatherings, the family's backbone, a phrase that sounded like a compliment and was in reality the description of a system where I produced money and they administered it without accounting to me. A system that had begun gradually and organically when I landed my first well-paying job at 28. And my mother called me 2 weeks after my first paycheck to tell me that the family home mortgage was behind and that if it was not brought current that month the bank would begin a process that would destroy the family. And I paid. And that payment was the first in a series that never had an agreed ending because it never had an agreed beginning. It simply happened and then kept happening because every time I considered the possibility of stopping it a reason appeared why that particular month was the wrong month to do it. The list of what I paid was a list I had built item by item over 4 years and had never seen in its entirety until the night of the parking lot, when for the first time I opened it on my phone with the intention of cancelling each thing rather than simply reviewing the total, and what I saw was this. The monthly mortgage on my parents' home, my mother's car loan, the insurance on that car, my younger brother Stephen's university tuition, the family phone plan that included 4 lines, my parents' supplemental health insurance, the cable and internet subscription for the house, and a monthly transfer I had agreed to make 2 years earlier when my mother explained it was for household expenses, and whose amount had increased 3 times since then without anyone consulting me. It simply arrived on the first of each month with the new amount and I paid it because it was my family and because in that moment there was always a reason not to ask the question I should have asked from the beginning. What had triggered my removal from the family group that night was a conversation that had started in a relatively ordinary way. My mother had shared in the group a photo of an apartment she had loved in a new development on the outskirts of the city, a 2-bedroom apartment with a terrace and amenities, and when I responded asking why she was looking at it given that they had their own home, my mother replied that they were thinking of renting it to have additional income and that they needed me to help with the down payment. And my brother Stephen immediately added that he also needed a new car because the one he had was no longer reliable. And when I wrote that at this moment it was not possible for me to take on any additional expenses and that we needed to talk about reorganizing the current commitments, my mother removed me from the group in under 4 minutes and sent me the private message, and I sat looking at the screen in that parking lot thinking that I had spent for years paying a mortgage that was not mine to end up expelled from the WhatsApp group of the family living in that house. Stephen was 23 and had spent for years at university studying a major he had changed twice, first business administration, then graphic design, which I paid for without asking questions about his academic performance because every time I tried to have that conversation my mother told me I was putting too much pressure on him and that Stephen needed his time. And what I knew about Stephen was what he chose to share in the family group, which was primarily photos of outings with friends and comments about television series, and what I did not know, what I would discover later, was that Stephen had not been actively enrolled in any courses for at least a year while I continued paying monthly tuition that was going somewhere that was not a university. My father, Ernest, was a relatively silent presence in all of this dynamic, not because he did not know what was happening but because he had developed over the years the specific ability to be present in conversations without taking a position in them. An ability that in retrospect I recognize as the ability of someone who has benefited from a system for so long that he has stopped seeing it as a system and sees it simply as the natural order of things. and the only time my father and I had a direct conversation about money was 3 years ago when I asked whether the mortgage could ever be transferred to his name now that his employment situation had improved, and he told me that it was complicated and that we would see. And I did not ask again because I learned that in my family direct questions about money produced the same response as questions about the weather, a response that acknowledged the topic without committing to any real information. The night of the parking lot, after cancelling the 8 payments, I sat in the car for approximately 20 minutes without doing anything else. I did not call anyone. I did not write any message. I did not cry. I simply sat with the phone in my hand and the grocery bags in the back seat and the strange and specific sensation of someone who has just released something very heavy that they had been carrying so long they no longer remembered what it felt like not to carry it. And then I started the car, drove to my apartment, put away the groceries, and went to sleep, and slept better than I had in months. The notifications began arriving the following morning with the punctuality of automated systems that detect a change and generate alerts. The mortgage bank sent a notification of unprocessed payment. The car insurance company sent another. The university sent a third about Stephen's tuition. And each of those notifications went to the emails and phones of the relevant parties before I had taken my first coffee of the morning. And by 9:15 my phone had 11 messages from my mother, 4 from Stephen, 2 from my father, and a missed call from a number I did not recognize but which turned out to be the real estate office of the apartment with the terrace my mother had been looking at, which told me that the conversations about that apartment had progressed further than the group photo had suggested. I did not respond to anything that day, not because I was avoiding conflict but because I had made the decision the night before not to have any conversation without being completely prepared to have it, and being completely prepared meant having all available information before speaking. And the information I had was incomplete because for years of paying without asking had created gaps I had never filled, so that day, instead of responding to messages, I did what I know how to do when I need to understand a financial situation, which is sit down with all available documents and build the complete picture. And what I found while building that picture was the first of several things I did not expect to find. The first unexpected thing was an email I had received 8 months ago from Stephen's university that I had at the time read as a routine communication about the academic calendar, but that reread with attention was actually a notification that Stephen had requested an academic leave of absence for 1 semester, and that since I was the registered pair on his account, the university was informing me of changes to his status, and that if I did not respond confirming I was aware, the account would remain active but without a current enrollment, and I had not responded because at the time I had read the subject line and filed the email without opening it fully. And what that meant was that I had been paying tuition for at least 2 semesters for an enrollment that did not exist, and that money had gone somewhere that was not my brother's education. I called the university that same day to confirm Stephen's status, and what they confirmed was that the academic leave had been extended, that Stephen had not been enrolled in any courses for the past 3 semesters, that the payments I had made during that period had been applied to a credit balance on his account that he could use when he decided to reactivate his enrollment or request a refund, and that the account currently held an accumulated credit of $4,300. And when I asked who could request the refund of that credit, they told me that the account holder, who was Stephen, or the registered pair, who was me, could request it with the corresponding documentation. And I noted that information and hung up and added it to the folder I was building. The second unexpected thing I found that afternoon when I reviewed more carefully the statements from the past 2 years looking for the destination of the monthly household expenses a transfer, and what I found was that that transfer, which I sent to my mother's account, coincided in date and amount with another transfer leaving that account toward a different account I did not recognize, and the pattern was consistent enough not to be a coincidence. And when I looked up the account number in the few family documents I had access to, I found that number appeared in a document my mother had sent me 2 years ago asking me to sign it as a moral guarantor of a rental contract, a document I had signed without reading it completely because my mother had sent it with urgency saying the landlord needed it that same day, and that now, reading it carefully, turned out to be the rental contract for a property that was not the family home but an apartment in another neighborhood whose existence I had never known. That information stopped me in a way few things do, because what it implied was that my family might be receiving rental income from a property whose existence they had hidden from me, and that I might have signed documents related to that property without understanding what I was signing, and that the monthly household expenses transfer might be being used in ways that had nothing to do with the household expenses I believed I was covering. And I called an attorney named Monica Salazar, whom a friend had recommended to me some time ago and whom I had never contacted because I had never believed I would need her, and told her I had a situation I needed to review with someone who understood documents and properties and money, and she told me to come to her office the next day with everything I had. What happened before that meeting was something I had not anticipated, which was a message from Stephen at 1 a.m. that was not a grievance but a threat. A message saying that if I did not reactivate the payments before Friday, he was going to tell everyone what I really was, and that he had a proofy of things that would destroy me professionally. And I read that message 3 times and then saved it in screenshots and sent it to Monica with a note saying to add it to the file. Because the difference between a family grievance and a documented threat is a legal difference that Monica had explained to me in our first call and that I had no intention of ignoring. The meeting with Monica lasted 4 hours, and at the end of those 4 hours the picture we had built together was considerably more complex than the one I had brought at the start, because Monica had identified in the documents I brought 3 categories of situations requiring attention in order of urgency. The first was the document I had signed as a moral guarantor of the rental contract, which Monica reviewed carefully and determined was not a moral guarantor document but a document with joint liability implications that I had signed without understanding its real scope. The second was Stephen's threat, which Monica classified as extortion and which required a specific legal response before I had any further conversation with him. And the third was the accumulated credit in the university account, which was money I had paid and had the right to recover with the correct documentation. Monica sent a letter to Stephen that same week, a letter establishing that his message had been received, documented, and legally classified, that any information he divulged about me in a way that damaged my professional reputation would be treated as defamation with specific consequences, and that if he had documents related to any matter involving me he was required to present them to the appropriate legal authority rather than using them as a private pressure instrument. And Stephen's response to that letter was the most complete silence I had received from my brother in years, which told me that the proofy he mentioned in his threat was probably considerably less solid than his one in the morning message had wanted to suggest. The situation of the rented apartment was more complex and took more time to resolve. Monica contacted the property registry to verify the ownership of the property whose rental contract I had signed, and what she found was that the property was registered in my parents' names and had been acquired 3 years ago, which coincided exactly with the period when I had started paying the monthly household expenses transfer, and that the rental income from that apartment had been received for 2 years without my knowledge of its existence, and that the document I had signed potentially made me jointly liable for any breach of the rental contract, which meant my signature had been protecting an investment of my parents from which I had never received information or any benefit. Monica drafted a formal letter to my parents establishing 3 points with the specific precision of someone who has been building legal documents for 20 years. The first was that I requested to be removed from any document in which my name or signature appeared as guarantor or jointly liable party for any property or contract that was not of my exclusive ownership. The second was that I required a documented settlement of all amounts I had transferred over for years with a specific breakdown of their actual application. And the third was that in the absence of that settlement within 30 days I would initiate steps to recover amounts I could document as misapplied, including the tuition for the semesters in which Stephen had not been enrolled. My mother responded to that letter not with a document but with a phone call that Monica received directly because I had instructed that all communications go through her, and in that call my mother said, as Monica reported to me with the professional neutrality of someone who listens to these conversations regularly, that I was being manipulated by an attorney who only wanted my money, that family had always supported me, and that I did not remember things correctly, and that their rented apartment was a family investment from which I would eventually have benefited. And Monica listened to all of that, took notes, thanked her for the call, and reported the contents to me that afternoon with the observation that none of my mother's statements constituted a response to any of the 3 points in the letter. The settlement never arrived in the format Monica had requested. What arrived on the 19th day was a handwritten document from my mother listing in general terms some of the expenses that according to her had been covered with the money I had sent, a document that had no specific dates, no verifiable amounts, and that included several items I had never agreed to cover. And Monica reviewed it and told me that document did not satisfy the standard of a settlement and that I could proceed with the recovery steps, and we proceeded, and the $4,300 university credit was returned to my account in a process that took 3 weeks, and that the university processed without any complication because the documentation was clear and I was the registered pair. What happened with the rest of the amounts is a longer process that has not yet concluded completely at the time I am writing this, but what has concluded is the system. The 8 payments cancelled the night of the parking lot were not reactivated. My parents' home mortgage is now in the process of being managed with their own resources. My mother's car insurance expired and was not renewed by me. Stephen's tuition was not paid and Stephen made the decision, apparently for the first time without anyone making it for him, to get a part-time job while he decides whether to return to university. And the family phone plan was cancelled and each person obtained their own line with their own contract and their own responsibility. My father called me 6 weeks after all of this, and it was the first call I received from any family member that did not come through Monica. And what my father said to me was brief and delivered in a voice I had not heard from him before, a voice I recognized as the voice of someone who has been thinking about something for weeks and has finally found the words, even if they are not the perfect words. And what he said was that there were things he had allowed to happen that should not have happened, that he had known about the apartment and should have told me, and that he understood if I needed time, and I told him yes, that I needed time, and that when I was ready to have a conversation that started from the truth I would be available to have it, and he said that seemed right to him, and we hung up, and it was the shortest and most honest conversation we had had in years. What I learned from all of this I think about in different ways depending on the day. Some days I think about it as a lesson about documents and about the importance of reading what you sign even when it is your own mother asking you with urgency. Other days I think about it as a lesson about the real cost of confusing love with the absence of limits. And other days, the days when I wake up in my apartment owing nothing to anyone, and with a salary that is completely mine to decide what to do with, I think about it simply as the moment I decided that being a family's backbone could not mean being the only person in that family carrying real consequences, and that the night my mother removed me from the WhatsApp group thinking it would break me was actually the night she gave me the information I needed to understand that the contract had ended, and that I was the only one who did not yet know it.